Phantom Menace is now regarded by many as a disappointing movie, ushering in an era of computer effects that superseded story, lambasted for its cartoon character comic relief, ill-judged child Vader, and a plot that centred on the exciting drama of trade negotiations.
Which started right here with the taxation of trade routes.
But there was a time when the prospect of a new Star Wars film was the biggest event in film history. A glorious time before a million childhood dreams cried out in anger and were never silenced.
How sweet it is. It's very, very tasty, especially with these tickets in my hand.
This is not just the story of a dream that was left like a limbless, smouldering mess on the banks of a Mustafar lava river. It is also the story of how new technology changed fandom and the movie-going experience forever. The story begins a long time ago when George Lucas, fresh off the successful premiere at Cannes of THX 1138, signed a multi-picture deal with United Artists. He pitched two films, one based on his childhood growing up in Modesto, California, and the other a Flash Gordon-esque fantasy film.
He originally wanted to do Flash Gordon. I'm real thankful it didn't work out, or Nick Nolte would be sitting here instead of me, you know.
United Artists passed on both, but Universal picked up the 60s nostalgia film American Graffiti.
I just saw a vision!
The production was not without its drama. Despite positive test screenings, Universal wanted to edit down the 112-minute film.
This is a joke, right?
Producer Francis Ford Coppola tried to buy the film to release as Lucas had intended, but Universal refused, making minor arbitrary cuts before its theatrical release.
You take care of yourself, man.
However, the film was a critical and commercial success, earning back over 150 times its budget at the box office. So when Lucas pitched Universal with his Flash Gordon-inspired sci-fi film, The Journal of Wills, they obviously rejected it for being a little strange. Producer Alan Ladd Jr., while admitting he didn't understand the sci-fi soap opera, believed in the talent of the young filmmaker and convinced Fox to invest.
There'll be no one to stop us this time.
Lucas set about writing the screenplay, a screenplay that rapidly grew out of control before being sliced up and renamed The Adventures of Luke Starkiller, as taken from the Journal of Wills, Saga 1, The Star Wars. Lucas at the time hoped to be able to go back and tell the full story, and so, as part of his contract negotiations, he took a pay cut to keep sequel and merchandising rights. The film, eventually titled simply Star Wars, faced studio interference as budget started to run over. Meanwhile, publicity supervisor Charles Lippincott was challenged with selling a movie that Fox's own research said no one wanted to see.
Star Wars, 1 billion years in the making, and it's coming to your galaxy this summer.
In 1976, Comic-Con was only 6 years old, and far from today's mass media takeover, the layout was simple card tables, folding chairs, and handmade signs. But if Star Wars was going to be a success, they had to get the name out there. Lippincott, accompanied by comic book writer and artist Roy Thomas and Howard Chaykin, hit the sci-fi convention circuit to talk to anyone who would listen. Far from the packed halls of Comic-Con today, the first Star Wars presentations were delivered to at most a couple of hundred people with a slideshow.
How much money do you have to make before you break even?
Well, the picture will cost a little over $7 million. We would have to gross 18 or 19 million to break even. That's one of the reasons why more science fiction pictures aren't made.
Yes.
Yeah, everybody go see it twice.
Attendees also had the opportunity to drop $1.75 on the first Star Wars collectible, an A4 poster drawn by Howard Chaykin that now sells for many thousands in mint condition. In the build-up to release, cinemas were not interested in screening the film, and Fox had to demand that if they wanted the much-anticipated The Other Side of Midnight, they would have to take Star Wars 2. Star Wars was released in the summer of 1977, and was greeted by queues around the block, breaking box office records. Kenner, who had won the contract to make toys for the film by virtue of being the only toy company who were interested, struggled to meet the demands of children who longed to relive their cinematic experience at home. The lack of any action figures by the time Christmas rolled around led to Kenner selling an empty box with a voucher to receive the toys as soon as they were available. Over the next 8 years, Kenner produced over 100 unique action figures and sold over 300 million.
Now you can get this new 4LOM action figure free for 5 proofs of purchase from any Star Wars action figures.
Now, question number 8. George Lucas, the man responsible for these movies, makes more money than... And the answer, you. That's right. Makes more money than you.
The success of the film and the lucrative merchandising rights Lucas had negotiated gave him the financial resources to step away from the studio system and self-fund the planned sequels. In a 1978 interview with Time magazine, as production was ramping up on the sequel, Lucas, who had stepped away from the director's chair, announced that, along with Star Wars 2, he was planning 10 more films that would culminate in his directorial return for the 12th installment, planned for 2001. For a young Star Wars fan in 1978, there was no internet, so for news on the saga, fans had to hope that magazines like Starlog and Starburst would print a story. Alternatively, you could join the Star Wars fan club that published a quarterly newsletter with the latest updates and interviews. In August of 1978, the previously mentioned 12 films was down to 9, with the upcoming Empire Strikes Back being the second film in the saga. Later, Lucas retconned this story to say that Star Wars, now retitled A New Hope, was always the 4th film in the saga.
Are you alright?
Lucas also declared that the first 3 films would deal with the friendship of a young Obi-Wan and Darth Vader.
Anakin Skywalker, meet Obi-Wan Kenobi.
Today, when we know very little about upcoming sequels, it is strange to read Lucas revealing the focus of the prequel trilogy and the title of the 3rd film in the saga, Revenge of the Jedi.
Is that correct? Revenge or Return?
Before Empire Strikes Back had even been released. Without an easy way to share information, crucial spoilers are also kept hidden. The best example is David Prowse revealing the climax of Empire. Darth Vader and Luke are hooked up in a do-or-die lightsaber duel when Luke learns that Darth is in fact his long-lost father. Printed in a local paper, it was quickly forgotten, and one of cinema's greatest reveals was left intact. In late summer of '77, faced with a number of making-ofs and spin-off books, Lucas sat down with then-director of publications Carol Teitelman to flesh out the Star Wars universe and settle on some continuity for the expanding saga. While some details changed, Leia had 2 much younger brothers for example, other details are strikingly similar to what was eventually presented in the prequels. Lucas speaks of the Galactic Senate and how the Chancellor could only serve 1 4-year term, before a newly elected Chancellor started buying off senators with the help of large intergalactic trade companies.
Into the bureaucrats, the true rulers of the Republic, and on the payroll of the Trade Federation, I might add.
In order to cut bureaucracy, more power was handed to the Chancellor, who was ultimately made Emperor for life.
So this is how liberty dies. With thunderous applause.
As in the films, the Emperor had created a secret army, and, led by Darth Vader, the Jedi were all but destroyed, except for Obi-Wan and Luke's father. There is no indication in these notes that the Emperor was a Sith Lord, and in the annotated screenplays it implies that the Emperor had become a recluse, and the likes of Grand Moff Tarkin were using the name and the threat of the Emperor to forward their own power-hungry desires.
The last remnants of the old Republic have been swept away.
The concept of the Force is also explored, with those being attuned to the Force having more midi-chlorians in their cells, but anyone could learn the Force if they were willing to work hard at it. In a more public arena, Lucas shared with Rolling Stone how Vader became more machine than man. Vader kills Luke's father, then Ben and Vader have a confrontation, just like they have in Star Wars, and Ben almost kills Vader. As a matter of fact, he falls into a volcanic pit and gets fried and is one destroyed being. This would be the scant bit of information fans were privy to, feeding their imaginations for over 2 decades. An epic lightsaber duel over the mouth of a volcano. In interviews, Mark Hamill would often be quizzed about future films, And when the cast visited kids' television show Blue Peter in 1980,
any kind of introduction. Whoa, Goldie, careful.
We get the first mention of prequels as related to Star Wars.
We finish off the trilogy, then we go back 20 years, and we do the story of young Darth Vader and the young Alec Guinness character.
Like a prequel.
That's right.
Mark would also frequently mention coming back to the role in the new millennium.
George has talked to me marginally about doing something at the turn of the century in the last trilogy, but it wouldn't be on the same plane of existence.
I know why I'm supposed to be here. Why? Because I got nowhere else to go.
But as Return of the Jedi made its way into cinemas...
In fact, it won't open for 2 more days, but already the lines are down the block.
Speculation about more films was dampened.
Well, George is very, very tired.
No, I think they were considering doing the prequels, 1, 2, and 3. And I don't know that they're going to do that now. I think, Mr. Lucas is very tired.
Lucas had recently adopted a daughter, and with his divorce in '83, he pulled back from movie making to be a father. It had been 10 years since Star Wars first hit the screen, but rather than a celebration of the first decade of Star Wars, the milestone was instead marked by George Lucas putting the official Star Wars fan club on a break. In the years that followed Return of the Jedi, the newsletter, which had once been filled with Star Wars news, now more often spoke of other Lucasfilm projects like Indiana Jones, The Labyrinth, and something called Howard the Duck. Despite Ewok movies and cartoons, and the opening of the Star Tours ride in Disneyland early in 1987, without a new movie in sight, interest in the saga was fading. The sale of Star Wars action figures dwindled, with a limited run of the fabled Last 16, with Yakface only selling outside America. In what has come to be known as the Dark Years, Star Wars merchandise disappeared from the shelves, and Kenner, who only had to pay Lucasfilm $10,000 a year to keep their lucrative toy rights, let a payment slip.
Might give up. Might give up.
Those dark days were short-lived. In 1991, Star Wars returned with the best-selling book Heir to the Empire by Timothy Zahn. X-Wing launched on the PC a couple of years later, selling over 100,000 copies on its debut weekend, proving there was still a huge appetite for the saga. First word of the prequels finally being written was hidden in the Star Wars screen entertainment software for Windows. You could finally ditch your flying toaster's screensaver in favour of Star Wars ship schematics or rolling Star Wars text. The latter, if run for 20 minutes, revealed a secret message from George Lucas. Such a glorious Easter egg would now be uncovered and shared within hours of release, but with very few people in the early 90s having access to the internet, the announcement remained a secret. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, Lucas's effects house, Industrial Light and Magic, finished work on Jurassic Park, and with it a new era of computer-generated special effects were born. With a renewed interest in the saga, and seeing CGI dinosaurs fully integrated into a live-action movie, Lucas announced publicly that he could finally realise his vision for the Star Wars prequels.
Well, it's you know, Obi-Wan Kenobi and Anakin Skywalker and Mrs. Anakin Skywalker.
The fact that Kenner no longer owned very favourable rights to make Star Wars ties was purely coincidental in Lucas deciding that the time was right to return to a galaxy far, far away. Thanks for watching, and special thanks to our Patreon supporters who make longer videos like this possible. Share with us your memories of the original trilogy in the comments below. We never forget the characters who shaped our childhood.